bringing you a snippet of all the really interesting conversations and discussions at Flame 2018. Marco Alvera is with me now, who's speaking today as president of GasNaturally. Marco, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
You were on a panel earlier today talking about decarbonisation. I mean, do you think the industry, the gas industry, is ready for this? And does the public also probably realise what is involved and how big the challenge is?
I think what came out of some of the studies that we were debating in the panel is very refreshing. So first, I think decarbonization is something that we need to achieve at a global scale. And certainly the policy makers in Europe are ahead of the curve, and with America slowing down on its own trajectory, I think there's an even greater role and potentially opportunity for Europe and for the industry. What I think as we approach the details of how we decarbonize, we will get to some tricky points. And what the debate today was about is trying to make the conversation a conversation of not black and white alternatives, but of solutions that need to work together.
Okay, so where do you see the tricky points? What would you point to?
I think it's very tricky if you continue with this sort of cold war between electrons and molecules, right, where it's either or. And when people try to pursue a full electrification agenda, we're missing out big opportunities. We're missing out the opportunities that we have by still using gas and clean gas and green gas as part of the solution. It's a lot cheaper. We have a study from Ecofis that estimates that it could be up to 140 billion euros per year cheaper, mainly in heating, just to use clean gas for a portion of the heating. There's a similar study from Poirier that talks about an aggregate NPV of 1.15 trillion euros savings that you would get by keeping some gas in the energy mix, still pursuing a full decarbonization strategy.
And yet the panel that you were on, you were getting a bit of opposition to that.
Yes, I think again, we started, and probably today there are still very different views. We're looking at two sides of the same coin. Some people are saying decarbonization at any cost, and a whole set of other people, including a lot of the industrial companies and associations and consumers, are saying we need cheap energy. Europe is spending 3 times as much as America for its energy right now. And this is not really sustainable. It's not going to make Europe any more competitive to America. So the priority should be to reduce energy and at the same time, energy costs at the same time to decarbonize. And so some of the pushback we were getting is linked to the fear that I understand some people have around infrastructure that gets locked in and then becomes a barrier to getting rid of gas altogether. I think what really policymakers should focus on is to be fit for the future. What we need to avoid now is to take one path that prevents us from any technological evolution that will happen.
Does that mean then, are you suggesting policymakers have almost got to build in more money for R&D?
Absolutely. That is a key word. We have underinvested. We need to invest more in CCS. We need to invest more in hydrogen. We need to invest more in power to gas. We talked to a number of renewable companies that are very keen to use gas as a means of transporting their energy. Because when you use gas as opposed to electricity, it costs sometimes even 10 times less. And so if you're producing a lot of wind offshore, it may be cheaper to turn that wind into gas and then use a pipeline to transfer that. That's just one example of some conversations that are ongoing.
You're talking about gas, obviously in the mix, but very much in the mix in very different ways, in different scenarios to the future. Is it possible in your mind maybe to look ahead for 5 or 10 years and sort of talk about the mix that you see then?
Yes, well, what we see is a demand outlook which is, let's call it stable for argument's sake. But what we also see in Europe is a very rapid decline of European production. And so the need of extra imports for natural gas is quite significant. If we look at the last 4 years, imports increased 30%, which is a very large amount. So that's where we need the new infrastructure to create new sources of gas. This will also help lower gas prices, which is a top priority for some people. And it will also help decarbonize as gas becomes more competitive than coal. Of course, a working ETS helps on that front as well.
You mentioned in your panel the word pragmatic. probably about 3 or 4 times. And I just wonder whether you really feel that that sort of pragmatism is lacking or just needs to be maybe a little more front and center.
I think whenever I hear ideology, whenever I hear people talking about electrification as a means, I think there's a risk. We need to think about lowering the carbon footprint, which is a global problem, it's not a European problem, in the most effective way. So it's not about which technology, we have to be technologically indifferent, and we need to sit down. We have in Europe great examples of CBAs, of cost-benefit methodologies, which is a proven and tested way to just decide what the best is. And before investing numbers which are staggering, today we heard someone talk about 8 trillion as a cost of full electrification. We have to ask ourselves, what's the cheapest way to achieve decarbonization?
And just finally, because you began to touch on it there by talking about Europe, but actually it's non-EU partners as well that you're going to need to talk to or need to involve.
We absolutely need to involve non-EU countries, and that's in order to achieve a 2% target for warming, but also because we have some very low-hanging fruits in some of these countries. If you're in a country in North Africa, and you're currently burning a lot of gas in inefficient turbines, and you have a lot of sun and you have a lot of land, you would welcome someone from Europe investing to build solar panels there. And the cost of that CO2 reduction is maybe 30, 40, 50 euros per ton. The cost of turning this hotel from gas heating to electric heating is probably more like 500 or 600 dollars per ton. So as Europe, because it's a global issue, we need to find a global solution and make sure that we're not closing our factories and putting energy security at stake just to achieve maybe 100% target here and having other parts that are not achieving any targets.
It's going to be a very interesting flame as everyone grapples with these issues. Marco, for the moment, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.